I just want to start off by thanking everyone for coming and our wonderful speakers here today, Paula and David Daley. This is going to be a terrific program. But I want to give a special shout out to our tech team, Dee Dee Vittori, Lynn Dooley, and Nancy Bell, who have worked so hard to put all this together and will continue to be working hard for the next hour and a half. Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you, and I'm in league to back us up and make these things happen. So Lynn is going to give you some instructions.
It's my pleasure. Good morning, everyone. As Anne mentioned, this presentation is a webinar, and as such, we cannot see or hear you, and you cannot see yourself on the screen. So as a result, the process for asking questions is going to be a little different. There are going to be two opportunities to ask questions because we have two speakers. We will ask for questions after Paula's presentation and again after David's presentation. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon that says Q&A, question and answer. Just click on that to enter any questions you might want to pose to our speakers. Please indicate which speaker you're directing your question to, and at the appropriate time, Anne or Sue will ask your question for you. All questions should go in Q&A. Please don't use the chat. What we're going to use the chat for is some important information to share about the speakers and their presentations. So please check that out. You can save the chat and all the information in it by clicking those three dots in the chat field and click on Save Chat. We'll also be sending out all those links in an email following the presentation. We are recording this meeting and we will post it to our website and our YouTube channel. Thank you. Anne?
Thanks so much, Lynn. I just want to point out that we will, the question and answer session after David's presentation will be longer. So you'll have an opportunity, if you didn't get a chance to get your question to Paula answered, there will be time at the end for that to happen. So again, thank you everyone for coming. We're talking about a very important topic or set of topics today. Really a big issue, pathways to fair and inclusive elections. As you all know, partisan gerrymandering and uncompetitive elections undermine representative government. It's been going on for a long time, but sometimes it feels even worse right now. Under our current system of single member, winner-take-all districts and widespread gerrymandering, many voters in this country are without representation in our governments. Today, we have two terrific speakers who will be talking about electoral reform and pathways to more fair and inclusive elections, Paula Lee and David Daley. So I am delighted to introduce Paula Lee, who will be our first speaker. As many of you know, Paula is a fellow League of Women Voters member. She's past president and current advocacy director of the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County. For her more than 20 years in the League, she has been an active and steadfast leader on electoral reform. Her work has led leagues in cities and states across the country to study electoral systems and to take a broader view and a more critical view of how we go about electing our leaders and representatives. The result of these efforts is our new California state position on electoral process adopted in 2019 and our national position on voter representation and electoral systems adopted in 2020, and other states have also adopted these positions. These positions promote representative government and support alternatives to plurality voting, including ranked choice voting and proportional representation. In addition to her work with the Sacramento County League, Paula is Vice President of Californians for Electoral Reform, and she is their legislative advocate for proportional representation and ranked choice voting. Paula presented at our March 2021 member meeting and is back to tell us more about ranked choice voting, what it is, how it works as a pathway to more inclusive elections. Paula?
Thank you, Anne. And I really want to thank all of the attendees for being here today. because whatever your priority issue is, electoral reform is necessary to achieve the public policy that we seek. No electoral system is perfect. Our current plurality system, while many are familiar with it, is archaic, and it leads those familiar apathy words leads to those familiar apathy words that league members often hear. My vote doesn't matter. Candidates I support never win. It's rigged for incumbents. There's no real choices. So many different systems were studied by local and state leagues all over the country. And there are other ranked systems that were examined. However, I'm stopping because when you put that up, I lost my notes.
I'm sorry, I took it down. I'm sorry, I thought you wanted me to have it up. Sorry.
Well, for everyone else, let's see. Hold on a minute, folks. So many of these other ranked systems were studied. However, ranked choice voting was the top choice in all the resulting state and local positions. It's really nothing new. It's called preference voting in Robert's Rules of Order. It's used in most democracies in the world, and it's used for the Academy Awards. And leagues have been helping implement ranked choice voting in cities all across the country. These are just a few of the benefits of being able to rank candidates by preference using RCV. We get empowered voters, more campaign civility, less money spent, and no wasted votes. And we'll be talking more about these benefits later. Next slide, please. Oh, I lose my notes when you do that. Okay. Now, the opposers of ranked choice voting often claim it's confusing, but ranked choice voting is not confusing. We've been doing it our whole lives. My granddaughter's favorite stuffy was left at home. She has a second choice, of course. Your movie or your favorite pie is sold out. The refrigerator or the restaurant is out of something. A second choice is required. And a while back, there were 19 or more choices on the presidential primary ballot. You may recall some of those conversations you had. Well, my first choice would be, and if they didn't have enough support, my second would be, my third. You would have an opinion on those candidates you could live with, and maybe some that you would never rank at all. So initially, this takes voter education, and that's where the league shines. Governor Newsom said it was confusing. However, voters in San Francisco have been ranking their candidates successfully since 2004 in many languages. And eliminating the runoffs in San Francisco saves in 2022 dollars an estimated $2.7 million per year. The city of Oakland saves $715,000 per year. And the extra bonus is a campaign finance benefit, which league members love. Candidates do not have to raise money for a second runoff election. Less money in politics. Next slide. This is our California state voter representation position that was adopted by the National League in 2020, as Anne said. And this position is the result of many league studies across the country. The language is taken directly from those positions, and it encourages electoral methods that provide the broadest voter representation possible. And it supports implementing alternatives to our current plurality system. This position was adopted unanimously at the California State Convention in 2019, and then nationally in 2020, our last national convention. It was adopted at the national convention with 93% support and unanimously adopted at the state convention. This is quite historic, and ranked choice voting meets all the criteria established in these positions. The state, next slide, please. The state and national position also supports proportional representation, which means electing policy-making bodies that proportionately reflect the people they represent. The position also wants to prevent gerrymandering. However, both of these goals are nearly impossible in our current system, with single winner take all districts that reflect only one political party, red or blue. The Fair Representation Act for Congress, which David Daley will be talking about, will help us achieve this goal of representative government using the multi-winner version of ranked choice voting. And we know that representative government is a fundamental principle in the League of Women Voters. Our position also encourages a concerted voter education effort. And you can read the whole entire position and how it came to be on page 47 and 48 in Impact and Issues. That's the national publication. And it contains all the League's national positions. It's a great resource, and we'll be putting a link in the chat. For today, I'll just be focusing on the single winner version of ranked choice voting, which is used to elect offices such as governor, attorney general, mayor, or a single winner in a district election. So what's wrong with our current system that came over with the British? Next slide, please. These are some of the problems created or intensified by our current plurality system. Our current system can easily provide a majority winner if there's only two candidates. One of them is guaranteed to win with majority support. However, in a three or four-way race, a candidate can win with less than a majority of votes due to vote splitting. This is also known as a spoiler effect. These wasted votes can help elect the voters' least favorite candidate. In 1992 and 2000 presidential elections, there were classic examples of vote splitting. Nader voters helped elect George Bush Sr. by splitting the vote with Gore. And in 1992, for those of you who remember Perot, those voters split the vote with Bush Sr. and helped elect Clinton with 43% of the vote. Nader helped elect George Bush Jr. Next slide. Here's some local examples. No majority winners due to vote splitting in these local Sonoma County recent elections. District 7 was really close. The winner won with almost 43%. You see, however, 58% of voters preferred someone else. So they feel like they lost. Vote splitting prevented a majority winner for the mayor of Windsor. Now, they could have used runoff elections to get a majority. However, another election costs more money for taxpayers and for candidates. And most of the time, runoff elections lack civility. They become very negative. Ranked choice voting is a simple upgrade to the way we vote, and it would allow these voters the option to rank these candidates in order of preference, 1, 2, 3, ranking only those that they could live with, so to speak. If their vote cannot help their top choice win, the next choice or backup will be counted, so votes aren't wasted. More voters feel they've had a say in an election if a candidate that they can live with wins. More candidates will be inclined to run without fear of vote splitting and being a spoiler. This means more choices for voters and more diverse candidates, including women, will run. They won't have to wait their turn. We can achieve a more inclusive and representative democracy. Now, I'm going to explain further how ranked choice voting is counted in just a few sentences, and then we're going to follow it up with a short video to see how ranked choice voting elections could have provided majority winners in these races. Voters pick a first choice candidate, and then they have the option to rank backup candidates. The counting begins, and if a candidate receives more than half of the first choice votes, that candidate wins, just like in any other election. However, if there's no majority winner after counting those first choices, the race is decided by an instant runoff. No need for a second election to determine a winner. The candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and the voters who picked that eliminated candidate as number one will have their vote count for their next choice. This process continues until you have a candidate who meets the threshold of 50% plus one to win. Next slide, or the video.
So what is ranked choice voting? In most parts of the United States, voters select a single candidate for each position on their ballot, and the candidate with the most votes wins. This is known as single choice winner-take-all, which can sometimes result in the election of a candidate who earned only a small percentage of the vote, even when the majority of voters supported other candidates. But that's not the only way of electing our leaders. Ranked choice voting is another voting method which allows voters to rank their candidates in order of preference. In a ranked choice voting election, a candidate needs to earn more than half of the votes to win. All first choices are counted, and if a candidate has a majority, then they win, just like any other election. If not, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who picked that candidate as number one will have their votes count for their next choice. This process continues until a candidate earns a majority and is declared the winner. Let's look at an example. Here, you select orange as your first choice candidate, yellow as your second, pink as your third, and green as your final choice. The first choices are counted. Yellow earned 35%, orange 21%, pink earned 28%, and green earned 16% of the vote. Because nobody won more than 50%, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who picked him as their first choice have their ballots count for their second choice. This continues until a candidate receives more than half of the votes, or 50% plus one. So what are some of the benefits of ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting provides more choices, allowing more than two candidates to compete without fear of splitting the vote among like-minded individuals. Sometimes voters feel pressured to vote for the lesser of two evils. Ranked choice voting allows people to vote for their favorite candidate, not just against the candidates they dislike. With ranked choice voting, we see more positive campaigns and less negative advertising. Candidates are encouraged to reach out to as many voters as possible, including those supporting their opponents. They can build a winning coalition with like-minded candidates to earn voters' second and third choices. It's time to fix our democracy and make our elections work better for everybody. We can do that with ranked choice voting. Visit www.fairvote.org to find out how you can get involved. So what is ranked choice voting?
Next slide. This is a sample of a ranked ballot. You can see that when voters, league members who do voter education, when they use this, they put this in the hands of voters, and it's very, very easily understood how to use it. It's quite intuitive. Now, can you guys give me back my notes? I can't find them. For the next slide. Okay, well, I'll go without my notes. This is a great photo. This is the New York City Council chambers. New York City used ranked choice voting for the first time last November, and this is what their chamber looks like now. 31 out of 51 women serve on the New York City Council. And as you can see, it is a very diverse group of women. Next slide. This is a video of how voters in the candidates in the Bay Area, and then we'll talk about what voters have to say about ranked choice voting. Many of those of you who are on this webinar probably recognize these folks.
What I like about ranked choice is that it fosters a sense of collegiality, I think, between candidates. And it also allows first-time candidates like myself to not have to encumber the expense of going through a primary and then potentially a runoff election. So for me, it was a really positive experience, and I would encourage people to get to know more about ranked choice voting.
In the city of Berkeley, our runoff elections prior to the implementation of ranked choice voting were at a time that did not allow our student population to fully participate in local elections. So by implementing ranked choice voting, we're saving taxpayer dollars, we're ensuring that the voice of the voters is heard, and we're giving the voters more choices, and we're also empowering and enabling grassroots candidates to run for office and be elected to represent their communities. So it's essential that we expand access to ranked choice voting throughout the state of California and the country, and that we further reform our democracy to empower the voice of the people.
It was fantastic. I was able to say, vote for this woman and me in whatever order you want. And I didn't have to say bad things about my opponents. I got to say something nice about one of my opponents, and I won the election.
You know, we had a large field of 8 pretty diverse candidates running. So I think ranked choice voting allowed the voters to be able to choose, you know, their multiple candidates and rank them in order. But it also was positive for the candidates as well, because it promoted a more cordial or collegial sort of atmosphere.
I really liked ranked choice voting because it took a lot of the stress out. You know, there were people who didn't realize we had ranked choice voting or didn't know about it, who felt very anxious because they said, oh no, Sonia, you and Christine are gonna split the pro-housing vote. And I was able to say that we wouldn't, because we have ranked choice voting in San Francisco, and most San Franciscans know how to use it.
I like ranked choice voting because I think it encourages many more people to run. It encourages a diversity of ideas. It gives people real choice in who to vote for. I think it's been an important improvement for our community.
So since San Francisco adopted ranked choice voting in 2004, Oakland in 2010, Berkeley at the same time, also San Leandro, it's really grown across the country. It's been adopted in over 50 cities now and in 2 states, Maine and Alaska, and New York City, which is the largest city in the country. So it's quite exciting. The next slide we're going to see is what voters have to say about ranked choice voting. While they're putting that up, we can look at the editorial support on the next slide. This editorial support for ranked choice voting and proportional representation includes David Brooks' piece. David Brooks from the New York Times and PBS, who wrote "One Reform to Save America." That'll be in the chat. Be sure you check that one out. Now, the next video is what voters have to say.
I like ranked choice voting because I felt it gave me the opportunity to support multiple candidates that I found promising. And I agree with her.
I thought ranked choice voting was a very easy way of selecting the 3 candidates that you feel are the most capable of doing the job.
And I like ranked choice voting because I get to vote for who I really want to vote for without worrying about splitting the vote.
I was really excited to see ranked choice voting on the ballot this year. This is my first experience with that format of voting, and I'm excited. I think that's the way a democracy should go. it's like a real majority, and it's the best way to include more than 2 parties.
I like ranked choice voting because sometimes there's just more than one candidate who I like in a race, and it's great to actually be able to vote for all of the candidates that you like.
I feel like it's a great way to support multiple people at once, just in case another person doesn't make it, and you get to support the next person.
I'd only really thought of the person that I first wanted, but then I liked having the opportunity to pick more than one, so I don't have to come back.
It allows me to pick my favorite, my second favorite, and the one that I can kind of live with in Oakland politics, which is awesome.
I chose someone who might have been a bit of an underdog in this race, and then I went with a classic that's very likely to win, but I like to have the ability to still have a voice and not have it thrown to another candidate that I really wouldn't have wanted.
So league members, as I mentioned at the start, whatever your priority issue is, electoral reform is necessary to achieve the public policy that we all seek. Policy is made by those who are elected. So achieving a more representative government is possible if we're open to electoral change. And one of the most exciting proposals for change is the Fair Representation Act for Congress, coming up with David Daley next. Anne?
Thank you, Paula. We actually have a question in the chat, and I have a question for you. So we will start with Rick's question. Rick is concerned about the conflation of ranked choice voting with instant runoff voting, as far as the scoring of ranked choice voting. IRV is only one form of RCV. There are many others, and most of them are better. So do you want to comment on that?
Instant runoff voting is the same thing as the single winner version of ranked choice voting. It's the same thing. I think he's referring to the differences between single winner and multiple winner. So I just covered how single winner works, and David will be covering how multiple winner works for legislative bodies.
Okay, so, my question has to do with when folks are considering going to ranked choice voting, there's a concern of the cost of moving over from the way they have been voting to using ranked choice voting, that there is at least a one-time cost and maybe ongoing cost. And yet you pointed out that in fact, it saves money in the long run. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Well, the one-time cost could be to purchase the software necessary to do the tabulating. Although it comes back to you in the savings by jurisdiction not having to have a runoff election. And so that cost is easily made up in the savings that's why I brought up the savings for San Francisco and Oakland. The New York City, big city, what they used was a universal tabulator that was open source software, and it was free for them to use. And that's something that they were able to use. Here in California, our software needs to be federally certified and state certified. And so Dominion, which is used in a lot of our California counties, Dominion, for counties that don't have ranked choice voting now, these are charter cities and counties, they are able to use ranked choice voting, but they have to pay Dominion for the software. The candidates save a tremendous amount of money by not having to raise money for a second election. And the counties ultimately save lots of money by not having to have runoff elections.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. And what about the look at how Sonoma County races, this is from Jerry Staveley. What about the look at how Sonoma County races would have turned out under RCV? Do you understand that question, Paula?
Well, no one got those races that I showed, no one had a majority winner. Mm-hmm. Had those races been using ranked choice voting, they would have had a majority winner if those voters would have been able to rank those candidates by preference. They would have had a majority winner in their one election with no runoffs needed. And that's the great thing about it, is that more voters are much happier with the result. The winner who has the majority has a real mandate. The people who maybe didn't get their first choice, but got their second or third choice, feel that they had a say and they don't feel like losers.
So, wait a minute. What's that?
They got a candidate they could live with, basically.
An anonymous attendee says it seems like the number 2 choice is a likely winner. Janet King asks, are there Moran or Sonoma jurisdictions that have adopted ranked choice voting? And I know there are none in Moran.
And not so far in Sonoma, but Sonoma, Santa Rosa is a great candidate for it. Santa Rosa is a charter city.
Yeah.
You must be a charter city. You must be a charter city to adopt it. And 2/3 of our cities in California are our general law. And that's why we need what's known as a local option bill to pass in the California legislature. So those general law cities can use ranked choice voting if their voters adopt it.
So we have one comment and one more question, and then I think we'll save other questions for afterwards. Rick, who was asking about the conflation of instant runoff with ranked choice voting, says he was thinking of alternative RCV systems such as board account. So
that's why I mentioned early on that there are other ranking systems that the league studied. However, ranked choice voting was the absolute top choice.
And Doreen Real says, can you comment on the effect of the power of political parties?
Oh, well, political parties. Oh, that's a big question. Oh, I'd love to spend some time on that one. But political parties right now have a lot of power. They often choose who can run. And that's why you don't see that many women, because women are told to wait their turn. Or you don't see that many choices because, things are planned out well in advance about where everyone's going to move. So political parties play a huge role, and often it limits our choices. And of course, political parties around the country have gerrymandered districts forever. Here, they're not able in California to be involved in the redistricting. However, as long as as you'll hear from David, as long as we're drawing single member districts, an independent commission is extremely limited, and districts will still be one-party districts because they're single member districts. Let's hear from David.
Oh, let's do. Okay, wonderful. So I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker, David Daley. Dave is a senior fellow at FairVote. He's an author, a teacher, lecturer, and a champion for electoral reform. He's the author of the national bestseller, I have to say rat bleaked, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, or the true story behind the secret plan to steal America's democracy, which tells how gerrymandering has been used systematically and nefariously to hijack the democratic process and manipulate the outcomes of elections. And I just happen to have it here. So can you see it? Not so well. There you go. Okay, so anyways, good book.
Mm-hmm.
This book was the basis for the award-winning documentary Slay the Dragon, which I know many of you have seen, and has been credited with helping to inspire the national drive to reform redistricting. Eric Holder has called David Daley our Paul Revere of partisan gerrymandering. David's second book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy, chronicles the victories and defeats in state efforts to reform elections and uphold voting rights. And I'm going to show you that one too. It's nice to see the covers of these things. They're actually there. And we put links to how you can get these books in the chat. So this book is about good things that are happening as well as some defeats, but it's much more, it's positive, very positive. His writing on voting rights and democracy has appeared widely, including in the New Yorker, the Washington Post, the Guardian, New York Magazine, the Atlantic, the Boston Globe, and Rolling Stone. He is the former editor-in-chief of Salon and has taught political science and journalism as a fellow at Wesleyan University, Boston College, and the University of Georgia. Today, he's going to be speaking with us about the Fair Representation Act, H.R. 3863, a bill that, if passed, would reform how we elect our senators and representatives to Congress. Well, Dave?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Paula, for that great presentation on RCV. Thanks to all of you for caring so much about democracy. Thank you to the League just for your passion and advocacy and all of the important work that you do to make our democracy better and stronger. These are extraordinarily consequential days for the future of our democracy. There is much that is uncertain. How recognizable our democracy will soon become, let alone whether an increasingly multiracial nation can ever become a multiracial democracy. There's a lot of reasons why we're in this place. A lot of the inequalities of our institutions have been with us from the very beginning. Others are of a more recent vintage, polarization, population patterns of the nation. But then there's those long-standing structures, the Electoral College, the structure of the US Senate. I would say that it has dramatically worsened in this moment. Partisan gerrymandering by most measures has never been worse. It's distorted the nature of the US House. It's perverted incentives for lawmakers. It's encouraged and accelerated the extremism that has left us so divided, even as the nation has confronted a pandemic and insurrection. There were 36 swing districts that remained over the course of this last decade. There may be fewer than 24 over the next, according to a New York Times study. There's only 16 districts left that voted for a president of one party and a representative of another, with only 5 seats dividing the two parties in Congress. The current round of redistricting has been a predictable partisan bloodbath. Parties get one chance to flip a district every decade if you've got the power to draw those lines. So we all recognize the dysfunction. Even as a country is deeply divided among class lines, among ideological lines, it seems to be unified in its frustration with our current brand of politics. According to Gallup polls, the approval rating of Congress has averaged 21% since 2005. That's going to cover spans in which Democrats were in charge and Republicans. There's never been a golden age of perfect representation, but the failure of our current institutions right now is really an existential one. It's no way to run a nation. John Adams imagined a house that was an exact portrait of the people at large, a representative body that should think, feel, reason, and act like them. One might suggest today's house more closely resembles, in miniature, a replica of a junior high school. How did the House turn so toxic? It's pretty easy to diagnose what's gone wrong. Every legislative election has become dangerously nationalized. The combination of gerrymandered districts and the geographic sorting of Democrats and Republicans creates these uncompetitive districts where party primaries are the only meaningful election, sending a new breed of politician warrior to Washington and incentivizing them never to compromise once they arrive. Team Red, Team Blue even come equipped with their own media ecosystem, each offering competing narratives of everything and fueling the permanent outrage war. What are we supposed to do? I've written a couple of books on partisan gerrymandering. You might expect to hear me say, let's end that toxic practice, and boy, would I love to. But as Paula suggested, it only solves part of the problem. Independent commissions only get us part way towards fixing this. It's been a big help in California, but it doesn't solve the problem in Massachusetts or Oklahoma or Kansas or Connecticut. It doesn't help urban Republicans or rural Democrats. It doesn't help a lot of independents who have been stranded in these districts across the nation. Gerrymandering is effective, and those district lines are so important because we elect representatives from single-member districts in winner-takes-all elections. If every district was competitive, the party with 50.1% still gets everything, and the party with 49.9% gets no voice at all. That doesn't change the current incentives. So as long as we have those single member districts in such polarized times, party primaries are still going to be the most important election. Both sides are going to stick to their base. No one will be incentivized to compromise. The problem in many ways is less redistricting than districting itself. And the winner takes all system sows division, encourages extremism, and as they're drawn these days with just such precise surgical lines by determined partisans able to identify and place voters into districts that they know the results for the next decade. These winner take all elections really pour gasoline onto an already polarized nation. I'm going to suggest that the time has come to consider a transformative idea that reflects the American electorate's desire for fairness and encourages the reemergence of bridge builders and candidates with an eye for compromise. It's an idea that involves changing the way we elect members of the House of Representatives. The best solution, in my opinion, would be indeed the Fair Representation Act, which has been introduced in Congress by Don Beyer of Virginia, Jamie Raskin of Maryland, Ro Khanna of California. It would be a more proportional House that would help parties truly represent their big tents, incentivize cooperation, and give everyone their fair say. The Fair Representation Act would make 3 fundamental changes in how voters elect their representative to the US House. First, the Fair Representation Act would change congressional districts into multi-member districts, as used in many states for their legislative elections. Think of it as a hybrid between what we have today and Senate seats, in which 2 people jointly represent a larger area. States with 5 or fewer members would elect all their representatives at large. Any state with 6 or more would elect representatives from multi-member districts. You keep the House at the same number. Every state gets the same number of members as they currently have. You simply have larger districts. Independent commissions draw these lines, and voters, as they cast ballots, use ranked choice voting. This allows voters to rank the candidates in order of preference rather than simply voting for their top choice. A version of this system already used in many municipalities, as Paula has so well detailed. What you do with this simple change is you make every district in the country a swing district. You create the potential to elect Democrats, Republicans, even independents from every district in the country. You create more opportunities for women and candidates of color. If you move to the 3rd slide of the ones that I sent in, if you take a state like Massachusetts, where I am talking to you from today, Massachusetts has 9 members of Congress, all of them Democrats, although 24% of Massachusetts voters are registered Republicans, 40% voted for Donald Trump, and the state has only had one state's only had one Democratic governor here since the days of Michael Dukakis. Paula mentioned Ross Perot. I'm going to go back even further and bring up Michael Dukakis. No Republican has held a seat in the House of Representatives from Massachusetts since 1994. So there's plenty of Republicans here. They just can't elect anybody for more than 2 decades. But if you divide Massachusetts into equal thirds, if you apply ranked choice voting and you elect 3 candidates in each district, a few things happen. For one thing, no district is gerrymandered. Rather, each district represents a larger and therefore more diverse array of voters. This is likely to attract more candidates and to entice those candidates to speak to the middle of the spectrum. More citizens feel someone spoke to their issue, which would encourage voter participation. A state like Oklahoma might be the opposite of Massachusetts, right? Plenty of Democrats, but it is very, very difficult to elect a Democrat to Congress. It's not just Massachusetts, of course, or Oklahoma. Here's another way to think about it. While Washington remains in the grasp of bitter polarization, 4 of the 5 most popular governors in recent years have been Republicans from heavily blue states in the Northeast: Maryland's Larry Hogan, Massachusetts' Charlie Baker, Vermont's Phil Scott, New Hampshire's Chris Sununu. There's a similar pattern across the South and Midwest. The most popular statewide politician in red Kentucky isn't Mitch McConnell or Rand Paul. It's the state's Democratic governor, Andy Beshear. Two other Democratic governors of traditional red states, Laura Kelly in Kansas, John Bel Edwards in Louisiana, have maintained approval ratings in the high 50s even through the pandemic. Kelly consistently earned higher poll numbers in Kansas than Donald Trump. But those four blue states send 20 members to the US House, and exactly one of them is a Republican. Those three red states encompass 14 US House seats. Only 2 are held by Democrats, and both of those could be gerrymandered red via redistricting this year. So by next fall, those states that can elect successful governors of the minority party might not have a single House member representing the other side. No representation in the House at all. No liberal Republicans from New England who might serve as bridge builders. No Democrats from the Plains or the Bayou. It's not that these politicians have gone extinct or that voters have moved past their philosophies. They win statewide. They command respect and popularity, but they can't get elected from single member gerrymandered districts. Gerrymandering, yes, something really, really important to do with all of this, but the problem is bigger and trickier than that. It's that single member districts etches in a fundamental unfairness that's at odds oftentimes with the goal of a fair map. The Fair Representation Act simplifies this. In a state like Massachusetts, where Republicans are scattered statewide, it's really hard to draw a district that can produce a Republican representative. What's a fair map in Kentucky, where it's kind of the opposite, right? All the Democrats are packed into Louisville or Lexington. What's fair in New York City, where there are plenty of urban Republicans? What's fair in a state like North Carolina, where both Democrats and Republicans have drawn these long looping districts, right, designed to ensure Black representation in 1 or 2 districts, but with the consequence of packing voters of color into 1 or 2 districts and tipping the rest of the state disproportionately red. The bottom line is that it's really, really hard to get to fair when you're using winner-take-all elections. And then beyond the question there of partisan fairness and all of these unrepresented voters, just consider what the lack of proportionality does to our politics. When nationalized elections and winner-take-all districts create entirely blue districts from some of these states, it pushes out an entire strain of a moderate Republican that might be a valuable force on today's party. If we could re-incentivize our politician, if we could redirect them toward a wider swath of voters, I think it could be the most meaningful and profound change we could possibly make to address the real root cause of our worsening dysfunction and polarization. Today's winner-take-all districts are largely uncompetitive due to gerrymandering or geography, and then those members just are encouraged to do nothing but pay attention to their base, hold off a primary challenge, and then coast into office in a November election. It doesn't matter if you're talking about someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who arrived in Congress from the 14th congressional district in Georgia and promptly said the fastest, or I like to post on Facebook that said the fastest way to remove Nancy Pelosi from office would be with a bullet to the head. She won her seat with 43,584 votes in a primary that everyone knew was tantamount to winning that seat. You also had 2 Democrats in deep blue Massachusetts who won their primaries in 2020 with 21% of the vote coasting into office. So we have to fix a winner-take-all, and we have to fix single-member districts if we're going to re-incentivize folks. Let me just wind up here quick. I know you're thinking, we can't do anything right now in our politics. How are we going to do big structural transformative change? And I think that this gets to one of the questions that was being asked before about political parties. We can get here because the Fair Representation Act would be good for Democrats and good for Republicans. Democrats right now, after all, are being gerrymandered into oblivion in Texas and Georgia, Florida. Republicans, privately, members of Congress, seem very uncomfortable with the conspiracy theorists in their mix and are in search of some kind of way to drive them back into the margins. But when the most extreme voices drive the incentives and responsible voices are afraid to cross them, that's a really delicate dance. Republican lawmakers need not be willing hostages. The Fair Representation Act would not silence anyone. It would simply modulate everyone's voice to its actual levels. Right now, you've got two parties that are taking very different approaches on democracy. Republicans in state legislatures have proposed a lot of bills that would, they maintain, reaffirm shaken Republican faith in the legitimacy of elections with additional voter ID provisions, toughened absentee ballot rules, less early voting. Democrats call these solutions in search of a problem after an election with the highest turnout and no evidence of anything resembling systemic fraud, and maintain that those measures will make it more difficult for blue-leaning voters to cast ballots. But we're stuck, right? I mean, you're not going to get any of this through Congress. The Democrats had it as their top priority. They lack a big enough majority to overcome a filibuster or the unanimous caucus support to do anything about it. You can't do this along party lines. This has got to be some Democrats and some Republicans coming together here in order to say, we can make change, we have to make change, we need to lift up the Fair Representation Act, a bill that ensures everyone feels represented, even as majorities earn the right to govern. We can diversify the kinds of Democrats and Republicans that get elected. We can allow ourselves to imagine a future where policy, not outrage, can be the focus for Congress. And it's time for something that I think all Americans can still be able to agree on, and that's fairness. So thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Dave. There are no questions so far in the Q&A.
Sold.
so there. But I have a question, or really a comment. What's been happening a lot in California is moving from at-large to district elections on the local level. And so you have cities, school districts, community college districts, who have elected their representatives at large forever, and now they're having to divide into districts. We have in Marin County, we have a situation where you can't really have a minority-majority district. There has been efforts to do that, but it's not quite possible, but people try to come close, but you sure do get into the packing problem. So that's one thing, but the other thing is with this move toward districts as a solution to representation, it, in my mind, is perhaps going in the wrong direction. Perhaps we should be thinking about electing at large or in large districts, multi-member districts with ranked choice voting, as the Fair Representation Act suggests. But more and more, our county at least is getting to split up into districts. So I don't know if either of you has any comment on that.
I think it's a complicated question, and the history of racial representation in this country is a complicated question, and so often power structures in this country, whether they're political power structures or racial power structures, have sort of alternated between districts and at large in order to preserve their power when faced with challenges from rising groups or different or new demographics. So what you might see is what you used to see across the South, for example, is when Black voters became, growing numbers of the electorate there, and they were able to elect into districts, these municipalities would move to at large, and that would allow them to remain all white, because an at-large election is going to reward the largest group as long as there's racial block voting, right? I mean, if in areas where the demographics whether white voters or black voters or Latino voters or Asian voters, stay together. Whenever you elect at large, you have the possibility of everybody being elected from the dominant majority group. So oftentimes districts becomes a way of ensuring that political power is fairly divided. But then those district lines can get gerrymandered in such a way as to twist things up even more. So you always sort of have to stay one step ahead of those who would twist and manipulate the system for their own advantage. The combination of larger multi-member districts and ranked choice voting is kind of a best of both worlds, I think, when you try to get the benefits of both, the benefits of ensuring that everybody has representation, but also the benefits of preventing these district lines from choosing winners and losers.
And so far, the voting rights community has not embraced ranked choice voting, multi-member at-large system as a remedy. So that's why all these lawsuits have boy, there's been over 100 lawsuits in California. And they've been very successful. However, I just wanted to point out for our Bay Area crowd here that the city of Albany, although very small, will be the first city in California to use ranked choice voting, the proportional method. So we'll see how that works. And this is really important because more and more, it's just impossible, as you said, to draw a district where the protected class can elect someone because people don't all live together in one area anymore. They're spread out, as you said, in your community. And this is very common.
So Leona Judson has a question. How close are we to passing the Fair Representation Act?
Well, David, you may have a comment, but I think I need to say that, and I think David would agree, this is a ways off. Political change like this is not easy or instant. However, it's really important for me to say here that I believe, and all the electoral reform advocates in the league across the country really hope that the League of Women Voters at the national level will be leaders on this and ultimately support it. Right now, this legislation is not something that we can, as league members, go to our congressional reps and talk about. Because the League of Women Voters at the national level has not officially supported this particular bill, the Fair Representation Act, but we certainly hope they will. And I want to say, though, that as constituents of our congressional representatives, we can go as constituents and speak to our representatives about the Fair Representation Act. And I would certainly encourage members to do that. And I have another thing to say, but I'll wait till another question on that one. David?
This is a long-term fix, but long-term fixes require starting the conversations now.
Yeah.
And you all are the trailblazers on electoral reform, which is why we need you so desperately. I know that there was a lot of league attention on the For the People Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis bills. And, you know, I think now that we're all sort of looking for another way forward, my hope is that there will be more momentum behind a proposal like this. I know it sounds like big, massive structural change, but this is the way elections work around the world in many other democracies that are functioning a little better than ours at this moment. And it sounds maybe a little difficult at first, but just remember how difficult the Electoral College sounded to you the first time you heard about that. We can make a big change. We can redesign a system to, work better. That's what this really is. It's a system fix. The system needs oil, and it's kind of out of it right now. This is a long-term problem, but I think, as Paula showed before, thought leaders across the political spectrum are beginning to really understand that this is what it's going to take, whether, it's New York Times editorial board, Washington Post editorial boards, big time writers at all of these publications, and a growing number of members of Congress endorsing this bill.
So Rick Lutman has a question. Please tell us more about how larger states' congressional representation would be configured into multi-member districts.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. Effectively, what you would have is you'd have independent commissions that would be in charge of drawing these lines in every state. So it would probably not be that much different than California right now, except that instead of drawing single member districts, they would be drawing multi-member districts. In most of these proposals, you're talking about districts of either 3, 4, or 5. So California would just have to decide how it, 51, 53, I forget, 53 going down to 51 maybe. It doesn't matter. You could, have, you're going to make me do math of 3, 4, and 5, aren't you? You could have, 8 5s and 4 4s and a couple of 3s, if that was how it made the most sense, in order to keep the various communities of interest together. I imagine your big cities probably already have 3, 4, 5 members of Congress right now, so you may well choose to draw lines that keep them together. But local states and independent commissions would have the power to do this. And the beauty of it is, as soon as you start drawing larger districts in just in every state, the power of these gerrymandered lines just disappears.
Doug Cooper has a question. In considering the Fair Representation Act, won't individual representatives currently in office look at how this would affect their chances of re-election and power in office and vote accordingly?
I think that's possible. Sure. I think if you're a Democrat from Massachusetts and you're thinking about this and you say, well, wait a second, you're going to turn my 9-0 state into a 6-3 state. That's 3 of us who aren't going to be here. Is that going to be me? And the same thing if you're a Democrat, a Republican from Oklahoma or Kansas, right? But I think the beauty of thinking about this long term is perhaps if we can get this passed, you say it's for the next redistricting cycle, and you kind of kick it down the road a little bit to maybe the fact that some of these folks won't be in office at that point in time, and that they might not be thinking about their own electoral prospects. Although, boy, watching the hearings this afternoon, some of these folks have sure been around Washington for a long, long time. But, I think that when you get members one-on-one, they understand what is so wrong, and they are frustrated working in this environment too. It's not what many of them signed up for or were hoping the institution would be. And so I think that there's some interest, at least in trying to fix and reform the institutions.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Rohana certainly agrees.
So Scott McCann has a question that's related. Where does the authority to change multi-member districts reside?
Congress simply has to pass a law. It's statutory. Right now, back in the 1960s, Congress passed a law saying you had to have single member districts. And that was, largely because a lot of states were doing various subterfuge with at large. And so districting was a good way around that. But now that they've found the way to do that kind of chicanery with districts, we need to address it all over again. It would be as simple as Congress passing a statute repealing the 1960s single member requirement.
Pretty easy.
Martha Cox has a question. Are you working with other collaborative entities, organizations on this? I'm thinking of the Independent Voter Network, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. IVN is terrific. There's a broad coalition working on this, and we certainly hope to welcome the league in a serious leadership way soon.
And within the league as well, there's league advocates across the country that are interested in this. So ultimately, we're thinking about how we can strategize with the national organization and see how we can get their support for the Fair Representation Act.
So, and closer to home, Jerry Stapley has a question. Has anyone from FairVote discussed HR 3853 with Representative Huffman? Says he is not supporting.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll have
She knows.
that.
I haven't heard about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that either. So it is interesting. So Debbie McKay asked, could individual states make the change on how they elect their congressional representatives? Their US congressional representatives.
Individual states have got a lot of control over this process. Yeah, I mean, they can decide whether, every state's process when it comes to redistricting is different. Some states have commissions. Every state that does a commission does it a little bit differently. Some states give the power to the legislature. Other states give it to the legislature and the governor. States have got a wide range of authority right now, but they do have to abide by the single member statute.
Okay. So I just want to remind you, if you have a question, to type it into the Q&A. All right, this is from, Paula.
Well, if you didn't have another question right away, I just wanted to explain that I have been working on this electoral reform issue for a long time, and it's because I lived in one of these single member districts that was drawn to be bright red, and I lived there for 30 years, and I had no representation at any level of government. That means the Congress, Assembly, and State Senate, even my Board of Supervisors. However, 11 years ago, I moved to Sacramento, and I am in a sea of blue. I am in a district represented by Doris Matsui, and I know exactly how my representatives are going to vote on legislation now. And while I complained all those years that I could never really do anything with an action alert, because what was John Doolittle or Tom McClintock, my far right representative, why would they care what I thought about legislation? So I was always frustrated, but now I'm in the sea of blue. And guess what? I'm still frustrated. Why? Because I know exactly how my representatives are going to vote. I know exactly how Doris Matsui voted on the John Lewis Advancement Act. And so when I got those action alerts, I felt the same way. And the beauty of the Fair Representation Act is this. If we had 3 member districts, or in California, I suspect it would be more like 5 member districts because of our large population, we would have 5 representatives that we could influence. That's real influence. They would really care about getting reelected next time, and they would care about what we thought. Right now, what is it, David? 95 at least % of all congressional representatives have safe seats. They don't need to care about what anybody else thinks. So I think that's the beauty of the Fair Representation Act, is that we could influence our representatives. Right now, red or blue, I didn't feel like I had much influence.
Well, that is absolutely related to the next question. For the Fair Representation Act model, how do the multiple representatives of the district address individual needs of constituents? Right now, there is one representative for residents to go to for assistance in solving problems. So many representatives feel responsibility to work for their constituents. So the Fair Representation Act would change who their constituents are, right?
Indeed, it would. You would have more people to go to for that kind of help. You know, whether that is help with immigration status or, you know, passport benefits or simply, you know, capital tours, you'd have more places to go for that. As it is right now, these districts are gerrymandered so wildly, you still might be traveling 5 hours. You know, I mean, as I've written these books, I've driven a bunch of these districts, and you can drive about 3.5 hours in Pennsylvania from the old 17th district, from, you know, one corner of it, twisting wildly around up to the top of it. We're not making constituent service easy right now. It would change under this plan, but I'm not sure it becomes any harder, and it might become better.
So Sean Gilbert has a question. David, are you having any serious dialogue with the National League?
You know, I'm reluctant to say exactly what kind of conversations are happening. I don't want to talk out of turn. But you know, yes, there's I know that individually a lot of people at the league in high levels of leadership are very supportive personally of this. I've spoken with, you know, multiple chapters around the country just like this as well. There's, you know, folks in high levels of leadership at the league nationally who, you know, came over from FairVote, who, you know, have worked on this issue for a long time. So I certainly think intellectually and, you know, thoughtfully, there's a real match there.
So this question is related. Will there be a caucus about it's not, it's about RCV. Will there be a caucus about RCV at this year's national convention, Paula?
Yes, the state of Maine is doing a wonderful caucus on using ranked choice voting in municipal elections for a proportional ranked choice voting in municipal elections. And that's going to help with the National League ultimately, if we can get more of this going in local elections. And I'm going to be doing a caucus on ranked choice voting messaging, how to message, how to talk to voters about it, how to talk to the electeds about it. And we're going to have a panel of league members who have actually worked on ranked choice voting campaigns and know messaging very well. And so that's going to, both those caucuses, if they're approved, I hope they will be, should be great. In addition, we'll be having a table that we've always had every year since 1996 to promote these ideas. And we'll be talking a lot about the Fair Representation Act at our table, using David's examples, you know, of his state where there are no Republican representatives. And so I think we'll be able to gather a lot of support at convention and virtual support as well. And my hope is that at the next national convention, maybe we can, if the National League has not taken a position yet, maybe we can work on including this as part of our national program. So we're going to spend the next 2 years working on that.
Yeah, and even though we can't speak out as league members in favor of this, we can certainly speak out as individuals, and we can speak to league leadership about
Yes,
it.
they told me that we could advocate for the fair representation within the league.
Yes.
So that's what we're doing today.
That's right. That's exactly what we're doing today. So another question about the Fair Representation Act: won't this arrangement disadvantage rural voters?
No, I don't think so. I don't think really it disadvantages anybody. I think certainly rural voters had a big advantage up until all those big Supreme Court cases in the 1960s that mandated districts be of equal population size. But I think once again, if you have districts of equal population size, you're not necessarily changing. You're not changing the power of any individual vote. What you're doing is re-incentivizing how politicians campaign and behave once in office, and you're trying to make them a little bit more accountable to everybody. What I would say right now is that most of these members are only accountable to the slightest sliver of their base. So it doesn't matter if these are rural voters or urban voters or what have you. Politicians are in gerrymandered single member districts. Their number one goal is fending off a primary challenge. And those primary elections are, as you know, they are low turnout. They are summer elections. They might be in August in some states. And so only the hardest core voters show up, and they tend to be, a lot of times politicians get surprised, right? That's how AOC knocks out, a longstanding member in New York with about 16,000 votes. It's how Eric Cantor lost. It was like an early July primary in Virginia. And so what happens is politicians see that and they get terrified and they say, well, I have to avoid a primary. I'm just going to not do anything that upsets that base. And so that's the sliver of the electorate that matters. And that's the sliver of the electorate right now that's driving the incentives for all of the rest of us. And the beauty of the Fair Representation Act is that in a proportional system, everybody gets the voice that they have votes for. So it's not that you don't still have a voice if you are somebody who wants to elect Marjorie Taylor Greene. You can still elect her. But she doesn't drive the incentive structure for everybody else. And right now it's that tiny sliver that's driving incentives for all of us. And that's what we have to fix.
Yes, I would say, really, I can't remember the numbers, but I know, for example, I don't say this to be partisan, but Democrats did get like 3 million more votes in the country than Republicans. And yet because of gerrymandered districts, we wound up with Kevin McCarthy as speaker. So that's one problem. Then I also wanted to comment that in California, I just did a map of the assembly. Instead, we have 80 assembly districts, as you know, in California, and I made them 16 5-member districts according to population, and then put voting data against that just to see what would have happened with a 5-member district. And in our rural areas of California that are mostly red, the Valley and up in Northern California. In those 5-member districts, you've got 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats elected, because the threshold to get a seat in a 5-member district is 17% of the vote. In the Bay Area and the Los Angeles area and along the coast, very blue part of our state, you got 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Maybe in the Bay Area, 4 Democrats, 1 Republican. You have at least 17% Republicans in the Bay Area. So they would get a seat. So you can see in California, this would not be very popular with Democrats, because right now Democrats control the entire state. And so fairness, which is what proportional representation is all about, is a hard sell when you're sitting in the driver's seat. However, what we as league members need to remember is that this is all about voters. We're trying to improve representation as our guiding principle and fix apathy and make things better for voters. So that's what we're focused on.
That is exactly right. Well, this has been just wonderful. I just want to thank you both so much. This has been terrific. There was one more question. I'm just going to leave this as a rhetorical thought question for everyone. Is it inconceivable that RCV would ever apply to the election of the President of the United States? Now, you guys can think about arguments pro and con that, and if it's ever possible. But I just want to thank both of you ever so much. This has been lovely. I know Dave has to run. He's a very popular man.
I'm going to jump in there and say super quick that Maine will be using RCV to elect President of the United States.
Yeah.
They have passed that. And in 2020, you had 4 Democratic primaries that used RCV. And it is a terrific way, as Paula said, when you've got 19 or 25 candidates, all of us know who we like first, second, third, and who we don't want at all. This solves so many problems. You know, it solves the problem of voting early, like you all can do in California, and then having a candidate drop out, and then your vote just doesn't count. I mean, there's so many great problems that RCV can solve. So I think that we will be using it much more in presidential elections to come.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, both of you. This was great.